सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। गीता ध्यानम्। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्धतामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्रा येन त्वया भारततल्यपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवैत्रेकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो भोक्ता गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सत्सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसशानूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सुतीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरननदी कैवर्तककेशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाज्ञानगकेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम्। लोके सज्जनषट्परैरहरः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं परिमला प्रध्वंसि न श्रेयसे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रः
दिव्यैस्तवैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततत्कतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो
यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः। देवाय तस्मै नमः। तस्मै नमः।
Hari Om. Good evening. So as we said last time, today is a revision session. And today we are going to look at some concepts of introductory Vedanta and also some selected verses from chapter 1 as also some concepts that are covered in chapter 1. So we will get started with that. So the first thing that we had talked about, when we started, one of the first things that we had talked about when we started our satsang was about invocation. And I thought I must cover this again. We just finished with our invocation prayers, and there is a sanctity and importance of invocation prayers, and that is basically because it is nothing but a prayer, a call on for attention, call on for inspiration, and essentially to help, and a prayer to seek fulfillment of what we are launching to do. But more than that, why is it that we do invocation? It's because when we invoke, something happens within us. It is like, my favorite example here is that of the walkie-talkie or the radio tuner that you use when you are in remote areas, or which is often used by the services, the forces, the army, and so on. So what happens there is that you tune into a frequency, and when both parties or all the parties that are communicating to each other are tuned into the same frequency, then there is fine tuning. The other example is tuning into a radio channel. So when you manually tune in, not an electronic radio, but when you manually tune into a radio channel, you kind of tune into that level of perfection where the transmission is absolutely clear, no disturbances, and full clarity. And when we say our invocation prayer, it is like fine tuning. It is like tuning in to what we are going to do, which then removes all the other disturbances that could come in and gives clarity to what we are pursuing to do. In fact, any task, if we start with a little bit of invocation, whatever that may be, that helps the focus on that task to be much better, the tuning to be much better, removes the disturbances, and there is clarity. Oftentimes when we start practices like yoga or spiritual sessions, we start with the chanting of Om. But if we can think of what helps us with our fine tuning, individual fine tuning, we can do that for practically any task that we do. There are two aspects involved in invocation. One is love and the other is respect. When there is love, which is nothing but a feeling of the heart, and when there is respect, there is a feeling of the head, of the brain. The heart is tuned to the Lord in love, and that is termed as mat chitaha. And the brain is tuned to the Lord in respect, that is known as mat praha. And when we say to the Lord, it is to the higher purpose, as we have said, the Ishvara Arpana, submitting whatever we are doing to the higher. And fine-tuning to the higher helps us to submit to the higher in a much better manner. The next topic that we had talked about was the uniqueness. Now we come to some of the concepts. After understanding what invocation is, let's talk about some of the concepts of Vedanta. And Vedanta essentially helps human beings achieve what they have set to achieve, and we will see what that is. But before that, it talks about what is it to be a human being? Why is it so unique to be a human being? Now, the common factors among all living species are, the first one is ahara or food, then nidra, which is sleep, bhayam or fear, and maithunam or propagation. These are common across all species. And all species have a body, most have a mind, and some have the intellect. The body perceives objects, the mind feels emotions, and the intellect thinks thoughts. And we also talked about the IPO model. IPO model is the input, process, output model. So the input, as far as the body, mind, intellect is concerned, or as far as the beings are concerned, the input comes in from the perceptory organs or the sense organs. The sense organs, we all know, are 5 in number. The eyes, the ears. Eyes looks at the form. The ears hears the sounds. The nose takes in the smell. The tongue experiences the taste, and the skin experiences the touch. All these are the input organs. And then the output organs are the ones with which we perpetuate to the external environment. While we seep in and take in from the external environment through the sensory organs, the perpetuation happens through the organs of action. The organs of action are the hands that help with the movement, the legs which also help with the movement, the vocal cords which help with speech, the reproductive system which helps with reproduction or propagation, and the excretory system which helps with excretion. And in between these two is the process. And the process goes through the mind and the intellect. Both the input and the output happens through the body. The process goes through the mind. When the perception comes in through the sensory organs, the first stage is that it goes to the mind, and that mind is the objective mind. The objective mind is the one that is interacting with the object world. And from the objective mind, it goes into the intellect. In the intellect rest our desires, the wants, and our ego. And this intellect, which is comprised of desires and ego, processes what comes through the objective mind, and thereby becomes subjective, which is what we think, what I, this body, mind, intellect composition, soul composition of I thinks, and then that goes into the subjective mind, and from there on gets further transmitted to the organs of actions, whereby it gets perpetuated. Now, this input process output model that creates inherent tendencies in human beings and in animals and in most creatures that have, in addition to body, have a sense of the mind and the intellect. Those inherent tendencies are called vasanas. Now, the problems come up when there is intense identification with the body, mind, and the intellect. While it also leads to various successes, and the human beings have achieved so much because of this paradigm, it is also the cause for multiple problems. And that is simply because when we identify to an extreme extent with our own body, mind, and intellect paradigm, we suffer the limitations of the body, because at the end of the day, the body has limitations. It can't do more than what it can do. We suffer the vagaries of the mind, because at the end of the day, the mind is wandering all over at the speed of thought. And we suffer the assumptions and the dictations of the intellect, because in the intellect is seated the judgmental factor, the opinions. And when we are capsuled in the body, mind, and intellect paradigm, we become ignorant of the other paradigms. And that is where the vicious loop of samsara starts. The vicious loop of samsara starts with the ignorance or with the over-obsession to our own body, mind, and intellect paradigm, which then leads to ignorance or agyana. Ignorance of agyana of what? Of anything else and everything else. And that ignorance or agyana, that then makes us operate from our own perspective, which is the I and the mine, the aham and the mama. And that then, because we are in our own perspective, because we are encapsulated in the body, mind, intellect paradigm, because we are entirely in the aham and the mama, that does not work in an environment where we are interacting with the world, with the external object world. So it typically leads to dissatisfaction and then to sorrow, because it does not work. My way or the highway does not work all the time. It may work sometime, but it does not work all the time. And when it does not work, it leads to sorrow. And that then leads to a misconception and mistaken belief, which is nothing but delusion. Sorrow is shoka and delusion is moha. And when this combination of ignorance, which is agyana, the concept of just being, that outlook being of me and myself and I and my aham and mama, shoka and moha, then that leads further to swadharma nasha, which is dereliction of one's duty. Because the paradigm of duty is there in the environment along with us, of which we are a part, which is caused by the lower efficiency and effectiveness of the human being. And then when there is swadharma nasha, then it goes back to ajnana. And that loop is the loop of samsara. The enhanced emotional and intellect facilities are unique to humans. And this gives the capability to human beings to understand this concept of being embroiled in the samsara. It gives us the capability to understand the limitations of being encapsulated in our own body, mind, and intellect. And also, in addition to that, gives us the capability to set goals and to pursue those goals. So I had used the example of a dog show. When you take a dog to a dog show and your dog wins, and the dog is on the podium and the number one position, the dog is barking, happy, but so is the dog which is in number 2, so is the dog which is in number 3, so are the dogs which are not on the podium. They are who they are and how they are. But who is the one that is so happy about my dog won the dog show? It is that human being who has that enhanced intellect. None of the dogs really care. It is the owner of the dog who is so proud about my dog winning the dog show. With this power, the humans, like I said, have harnessed a lot of the nature's powers, which the human beings feared earlier. But at the same time, it has also caused a lot of problems for humanity. While we have been able to harness, a lot of problems have also come up. Now, we said that because of the intellect, the human beings are able to set and pursue goals. These goals are called Purushartha. Purush is human, Artha is goals, human goals. Artha is also meaning, but in this context, Artha refers to goals. Purushartha means human goals. And there are 3 types of Purushartha. The first is Artha Purushartha, which are necessary for the survival and wealth of human beings. First survival, and then the wealth of human beings. Food, clothing, shelter, these are all Artha Purusharthas. And human beings typically tend to first ensure that their Artha Purusharthas are fulfilled, and then they also need to ensure. We will talk more about this in chapter 2. And Artha Purushartha helps us to remove sadness, dukkha nivritti. When you have your basic requirements and basic needs taken care of, then you are not struggling for pure existence, for pure survival. And when you are not struggling for just survival, there is sadness is removed. Even in our life, we are all very fortunate to be living in a country like, to be born and living in a country like India. Imagine there are some other countries in the world, where if we had been, even within India, if we had been in Kashmir, for example, or Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or in Afghanistan, it's a much more difficult world. Survival itself is a big question mark. Some of the areas where even today there is famine, there is, basic food is not available, there is no shelter. Survival itself is a question. So, Artha Purushartha helps removal of sadness or dukkha nivritti. The second kind of human goal is called Kama Purushartha. Once you have your basic needs, survival aspects are taken care of, then comes the question of entertainment, of socializing, of Kama, fulfillment of desires, desire-related goals. Of course, there is desire for Artha also, but this is more desire for entertainment. That is called Kama Purushartha. And then At the next level, once you are suitably and sufficiently entertained, then there is dharma purushartha. Dharma purushartha means goodwill. The goal to have goodwill, the goal to have punyam. Everyone wants to be a punya purush. And kama purushartha and dharma purushartha lead to sukha praptihi, acquisition of happiness. While artha purushartha helps in dukkha nivritti, removal of sadness, kama and dharma purushartha help in acquisition of happiness or sukha praptihi. But the limitations of these three goals are pain, dissatisfaction, and dependence. If they don't get fulfilled, there is pain. If they don't get fulfilled to the extent that the goal setting was done, there is dissatisfaction. And we are dependent on these. These need to get done. My goals need to get fulfilled so that I have no dukkha and I have sukha. I remove dukkha and I acquire sukha. I get dependent on them. And why are we seeing this also in a Bhagavad Gita satsang? Because we will shortly see that this is exactly the state in which Arjuna is. So goals are seemingly different. We'll come to Arjuna a little later, but goals are seemingly, coming back to Vedanta, seemingly they are different for different human beings. Because all of us are pursuing various vocations, the environment in which we are in are different. Some people are doctors, some people have career-oriented goals, some people have family-oriented goals, some people have society-oriented goals, welfare-oriented goals, power-oriented goals, and so on and so forth. Seemingly very different. But through all these paths, what is every human being striving to attain? Whether I want money, why do I want that money? I want family bonding. Why do I want that family bonding? I want success in my career. I want to become a vice president or a CEO. Why do I want it? I want to do welfare in society. Why do I want it? Through all of these paths, everyone is seeking one thing, and that is happiness. It is the universal calling. Whatever we do, whatever we pursue, the natural pursuit of the ultimate thing through anything we pursue, through any medium, is happiness. And what kind of happiness? Fully happy, fully, completely happy. We've talked about it multiple times in our satsang. Free of sorrow, longer, everlasting happiness, and deep happiness that touches our core. So this kind of deep happiness that touches our core and sustains, is there for a longer duration, forever if possible, is called Purna Ananda, or full happiness. And this Purna Ananda is the ultimate goal of the human beings, this full, complete happiness. That is the Parama Purushartha. Parama Purushartha is the ultimate goal. It is said, Purushaihi Arthyate iti Parama Purushartha, iti Purna Ananda. One of the interesting aspects we also saw is that if this is what we are all seeking, and we are all seeking this happiness through various means, and fundamentally these means come from what? Come from desires. So a very interesting depiction of happiness is a function of desires entertained and desires fulfilled. And we saw that happiness is equal to desires fulfilled divided by desires entertained. What do we do first? We first entertain desire. The desire takes birth in us. Once the desire is there in us, then we need to get it fulfilled. The more the desires we get fulfilled, the more happy we are. And the lesser the number of desires entertained, the more happy we are. So happiness, or H, if you write this down in your notebooks, H is equal to DF. DF is desires fulfilled divided by desires entertained. The numerator keeps increasing, the more happy you are. The denominator keeps decreasing, the more happier you are. And if the desire becomes zero, the denominator becomes zero, then there is infinite happiness, Purna Ananda. And through lot of ways, Bhagavan in the Bhagavad Gita talks to us how can we be. We also saw in chapter 5. How can we be in the world? How can we do what we are doing in the world without being inflicted by desires? And thereby have Purna Ananda. So how does one attain Purna Ananda? Most human beings follow the path of the pleasant. The glitter, the joy, whatever gives joy. But whatever is the path of the pleasant, whatever gives joy, is temporary. It is ephemeral. And a temporary, ephemeral resolution to any problem is not a permanent solution. These are nothing but band-aid solutions. For example, if we have, let's say we have COVID, we have fever and we have COVID, we take a paracetamol. The paracetamol will provide us relief, but it will not remove COVID. It does not solve the problem. It gives you temporary relief, but it is not a relief, is not a solution. The pursuit of finding, and we are doing this all the time in our lives. There are infinite examples if we delve into ourselves, where we are pursuing pleasant solutions, pleasant aspects, thinking that we will find solution. The pursuit of finding temporary resolution to long-standing deep problems is called prayas. This will be lost in time. It will not be there forever. And one would get back to square one. You will go ahead, you will keep pursuing that pleasantness, you will feel the joy, and you will keep pursuing, you will feel the joy, but that longing for ultimate goal, the Paramapurushartha, that longing for happiness will remain. Throughout our lives, we will experience the joys, our age will go on, but that longing will continue to be there with us. Because, why? Because we have been pursuing temporary solutions as a resolution to that deeper need. The pursuit of finding a permanent, everlasting solution is called Shreyas. But let us say that we get permanent happiness. Happiness that touches our core and happiness that is everlasting, quote unquote. Will it be there actually forever? What is forever? Anything that begins at a point in time will end at another point in time. Everything, anything and everything. So anything that actually starts at a point in time has an end. So anything that will start, if we get permanent happiness today, the deep everlasting happiness today, which we are thinking, it will have some point in time where it will end. So gaining or getting it, getting that permanent happiness, gaining that permanent happiness will not happen. This is the first knowledge that the Vedas give us. So the Vedas, the first thing that the Vedas teach us is, do not try to gain or acquire permanent happiness. It is not like acquiring a property or acquiring a piece of cake or a chocolate or a shirt. Do not try to acquire this ultimate Paramapurushartha of getting permanent happiness. The Mundaka Upanishad says, Na asti akritaha kritena. Na asti, not there. Akritaha, that which is permanent. Kritena, by action or effort. By doing any action or effort, you cannot get something which is going to be permanent forever. Thus, the Vedas tell us that the method of doing anything with the aim of getting permanent happiness is wrong. So what is the method then? Before we go there, let us see, we are talking about the Vedas. So quick, brief discussion on what the Vedas are. The Vedas comes from the root vid, V-I-D, vid. Vid means to know. It comes from the root to know. The Vedas is a means of knowledge. Like if we are studying pharmacy, the means of knowledge is the books of pharmacy. Similarly, the Vedas are means of knowledge. Which knowledge? It's a means of knowledge means pramana. Pramana means means. For what? Lot of things. When you read the Vedas, when you read Bhagavad Gita, you get lots of knowledge. But among those lot of things, it provides the solution to this ultimate universal goal, the Parama Purushartha of attaining Purna Ananda or full happiness. Means of knowledge to acquire that. And the portion of the Vedas that deals with this subject is called Vedanta. And the solution that Vedanta gives is called Shreyas. The Vedas are divided into 3 sections. It's called Kandatrayam, 3 sections. The first section is Karma Kanda, which is action oriented. The second section is Upasana Kanda, which is devotion oriented. And the third section is Jnana Kanda, which is knowledge oriented. Please remember this because we'll see this in Bhagavad Gita also, the 3 sections. While the Karma Kanda is preparatory in nature, the Upasana and the Jnana Kanda are solutionary in nature. Any activity, anything that we launch, any pursuit requires planning, preparation, strategizing, and execution, and discipline in execution. Anything that we do. Similarly, if we launch this pursuit of finding that ultimate Parama Purushartha, of that ultimate happiness, the first thing that we do is karma disciplines the mind and helps in preparing for it. And knowledge, which is Jnana Kanda, that knowledge gives the knowledge of our own self, of our own true nature. And this knowledge of our own true nature, that leads to knowledge-based action. Remember, we talked about Karma Yoga. We'll again in the revision also touch upon it. Karma is any action. Karma Yoga is action that has karma plus Ishwararpana Buddhi and Prasada Buddhi, that attitude. So that knowledge-based action, action in true context, that brings in the yoga aspect into karma. And that comes from jnana. And that is covered in the Jnana Kanda. And then Upasana Kanda, that deals with the devotion to the higher. Whatever we do with knowledge, the Karma Yoga that we do, when we devote it to the higher, and it is not done for a selfish purpose, that leads to devoted action. And that action is action for a greater cause, something that is beyond us, beyond selfish purposes. And that is nothing but bhakti. And this results in 2 things. It results in purity of mind and single pointedness of the mind, the focus. Purity of mind is chitta shuddhi. Chitta is mind, shuddhi is purity. And single pointedness of the mind is chitta ekagratha. Chitta mind, ekagratha. Eka one, agraha pointed, tha is pointedness. Chitta ekagratha. One favorite example of mine for chitta shuddhi and chitta ekagratha is the Tirumalai darshan, or when you go to the temple of your choice for darshan. But Tirumalai darshan is the best example, because what's happening there, you are getting pushed out all the time. You have come the long way to, pray to Bhagwan in Tirupati, in Tirumalai, but that jargandi is happening. They are pushing you out because there are millions and millions of people in that line. So when you are going in with that chitta ekagratha, you are that single pointedness of, I need to get this darshan of the Lord. And that darshan is the fleeting second, maybe a couple of seconds if you are lucky, because of that jargandi push. But when you come out, whatever troubles you may have had before you went in, when you come out with chitta shuddhi. At least for a few period of minutes, hours, days, you come out with that chitta shuddhi. So what does this help us with? It results in the freedom to enjoy what is available. The freedom to not regret what is not available. What is there, that fleeting second of darshan with Bhagwan, you enjoy that. And once you come out, you live in that fleeting second. You are not regretting that you have come out. So in life, we'll get what we get. So that capability to enjoy what is there and the capability to not regret what is not there. And what is this kind of a freedom? It's nothing but freedom from the Purusharthas, the Artha Purushartha, Kama Purushartha and Dharma Purushartha. Because what are they? Artha Purushartha is to attain things, enable tools, instruments that enable us to survive. If it's not there, we are unhappy. But this freedom gives us the capability to not be unhappy when you don't have something which enables that survival. Same time, if you have Kama and Dharma, you are attaining Sukha. And if Kama and Dharma, something doesn't get fulfilled, you are not getting that Sukha, which could lead to Dukkha or which could lead to frustration of not attaining that Sukha. This freedom gives the capability to not feel that sense of loss if you don't attain that Kama or Dharma. We have worked very hard. We are anticipating somebody to appreciate us. That appreciation doesn't come. Dharma Purushartha. If we have this freedom, we will continue to do what we are doing without getting dejected. Thus, the Vedas teach us that the happiness that we are searching for, we do not get it. We cannot acquire it. Because if we acquire it, if we get it, we will lose it. And the Vedas tells us that it is within you. Discover it. Discover it by getting this freedom. Discover it by not becoming dependent on those goals. One basic simple way to do this, which we all hear all the time, which we don't practice, but if we practice is very helpful. Just count our blessings, not the troubles. If the mind is getting burdened with troublesome thoughts, kick them out, replace them with good thoughts, forcibly replace them with good thoughts. Thus, the Vedas is preparatory and solutionary in nature. Preparatory through karma and solutionary through bhakti and jnana. And it says, what you are searching for is within you. Don't try to go out and seek. Till we understand this, we keep seeking. Seeking happens outside us. Like I had said earlier, if my car key is lost, or I had used this example, my spectacle, my spectacle is lost and I'm searching for it all over the place. Finally, I discovered that, oh my God, I had myself put it here on top of my head. I've gone through my bedroom, my drawing room, my drawers, everywhere. It was actually here. But in my intensity of pursuit, I can't even feel it here. It is within you. If you're seeking it outside, you are not going to find it. And you'll be fooled by the joy which is impersonating the happiness. We have to discover it within us. And when we discover it within us, that is the time we actually have it. That is the revealing the divinity that is within each one of us. When we understand this, the seeking stops and the search begins till we, of course, unveil the divinity. Now, how do we do this? Unveiling this, finding out. Like anything else, like any exploration, it requires probing, it requires inquiry. And this inquiry is the probing into the self. We have seen a lot of probing outside us, like the Chandrayaan, or the Mars Explorer. That's probe into the space. But we have to discover this true self, we have to launch the probe within us. And the probe that we are launching is through the help of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Like the Chandrayaan helps us discover the properties of the moon, Srimad Bhagavad Gita helps us discover ourselves. And the message of the Bhagavad Gita is, be free of sorrow and delusion, perform the right action, purify your mind, get it single-pointed, chitta ekagrata, So the Bhagavad Gita also has 3 sections, the Kandatrayam. The first section is chapter 1 to 6. Along with karma, chapter 1 to 6 also gives us clarity on the nature of the Atman or the self, the Atma Swarupa. We have come up to chapter 5. Ideally, this revision should happen after chapter 6. So, chapter 1 to 6 is the first section and the first kanda, which gives us knowledge about Atma Swarupa. It also describes karma and gives the nature of the self. The second section is from chapter 7 to 12. And chapter 7 to 12, even as it describes upasana, which is bhakti, devotion, it gives clarity on Ishvara or nature of the God. Because upasana is towards what? Bhakti is towards what? Towards the higher power, towards God. So it gives clarity on the nature of the Bhagavat Ishvara Swarupa. And the third section is chapter 13 to 18. And even as it details out jnana and also bhakti, parabhakti, that also comes in that section, it gives clarity on the nature of non-duality. Now this non-duality, some say is one, Advaita, and some say is similar, Vishishta Advaita. That, when we get to that stage, we will figure out whether it is one or similar. But it is non-duality. Non-duality helps you realize that happiness, that deep, everlasting, ultimate goal is nowhere but within you. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita brings us this vast knowledge to us, which is contained in the Vedas. And the Bhagavad Gita, very simple, uplifting manner. Because some of these stories that we hear, the way Krishna talks to Arjuna and through Arjuna to us, is extremely simple and very, very uplifting. So with that introduction in terms of, some of the basic concepts of Vedanta and why is it that we are pursuing what we are pursuing, and how is it that Bhagavad Gita is the text that is going to help us get there, we come to chapter 1. So chapter 1 essentially has 6 parts. The first part is Dhritarashtra asks a question. It starts with that. He asks Sanjaya a question. And the second part is Duryodhana is nervous before the battle. And it talks about Duryodhana's nervousness, and it talks about Duryodhana's disregard and suspicion of his own guru, Dronacharya, and the description of the 2 armies. Duryodhana actually describes the 2 armies to Dronacharya. The third part is Bhishma Pitamaha, he blows the conch and announces the start of the war, launches the war, like blowing the battle bugle. Okay. And along with that, it is followed by the tumultuous blowing of the conches of the entire battlefield out there. The Pandava conches, war cries, Kaurava conches, and Sanjaya's beautiful description of the various conches with their names, especially the Pandava conches. And then Arjuna's command to Sri Krishna to take his chariot to the middle of the battlefield, because he wants to view and inspect the forces. The fifth part is Arjuna's grief, his shoka and moha, which comes from aham and mama. And the sixth part is Arjuna is completely dejected and he gives up, saying, I cannot do this. So we will start with chapter 1. These are the 6 portions. And we will start with reciting first verse.
Dhritarashtra uvacha dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvat Sanjaya.
So Dhritarashtra's question, the first part. What's going on, Sanjaya? In Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre, the land of Dharma. Kurukshetra, the land of Dharma. Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre is Kurukshetra, the land of Dharma. What is going on? What are my people doing? What are the sons of Pandava doing? The Yuyutsavaha. Yuyutsavaha are the people who are desirous of fighting. That is the first question or the first part. Now, one crucial aspect here, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. Dharma, the land of Dharma. What is this Dharma? There are various cosmic laws. One of the prominent cosmic laws that we are all aware of is the force of gravitation. It's a cosmic law. Dharma is among the biggest or the biggest of all cosmic laws. It is universal, timeless, and every entity must follow this cosmic law. Dharma is derived from the root dhar or dhr. And this means, dhar or dhr means to uphold, to sustain, to support. Dharma denotes that which holds together by upholding, by sustaining, by supporting the different aspects and qualities that make the whole of anything, of the object. Dharma ordinarily is translated as many things: religious code, righteousness, goodness, morality, duty, charity, many more, many more. But the fundamental meaning of Dharma is one that upholds. And from that, the best rendering of Dharma comes, which is the law of being. Meaning, that which makes a thing, anything, any being, what it is. That which makes me what I am. That which makes this phone what it is. That is the Dharma of that entity, that being. For example, it is the Dharma of the fire to burn. It is the Dharma of the sun to shine. The essential nature or property of anything without which it cannot retain its independent existence is Dharma. So a cold, dark sun is not possible. Heat and light are its Dharma. The Bhagavad Gita starts with the word Dharma. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. The first verse that we just saw. And the last verse of the Bhagavad Gita concludes with Mama. Mama means mine. That is the verse 78 of chapter 18. So we may conclude from this that for each one of us, based on what we just saw, what did we see? We saw that our goal is ultimate happiness. To attain that ultimate happiness, we have to discover our true nature. To discover our true nature, we have to launch a probe into ourselves. Right? So Bhagavad Gita, Dharma Mama. Mama Dharma is nothing but my Dharma. My Dharma is nothing but what is it that makes me who I am. So we can decipher that Bhagavad Gita helps me discover what is this that makes me who I am. Which means it helps me discover my true nature. Which means that by discovering my true nature, I reveal the divinity within me. My essential nature. This should be our goal of reading the Bhagavad Gita. The Purushartha of reading Bhagavad Gita should be to discover our essential nature. And each one of us has to do it in our own way. So that context, when we read, we should bring it together. It is also said that one who follows Dharma, Dharma protects. Whoever recognizes one's Dharma and keeps that Dharma as the pole star and navigating through the life uses that pole star, that Dharma pole star, to go through lives, is always successful in the long run. In the night, when you are traversing through a forest, when it is pitch dark, you have nothing in your hand. The only thing you have is, if you are following the pole star, you are heading in the direction of north. True north. That's why it's called true north. So that true north of my life, that true north of where I am heading to in my life, that pole star is Dharma. It may appear in the night that, hey, where are we going? But if we follow that pole star, it will always take us to that direction. And if we keep that pole star in context, if we have to go south or east or west, but if we keep that pole star in context, we will reach where we have to reach, whichever direction. though it may not be clear in the pitch darkness of the night. Similarly, in life, if we keep Dharma as the pole star, we will reach where we have to reach. In the Mahabharata, there are two major examples. One of Duryodhana, and because of Duryodhana, people who were with him, and the Pandavas. Duryodhana appeared to be successful in a long portion of the Mahabharata. That was decades. Across decades, if you read the Mahabharata, it looks like Duryodhana, this big king, mighty king, very successful. But fundamentally, he followed adharma. And it proved to be a recipe for failure in his life. The Pandavas, on the other hand, sometimes you'll feel, are these guys fools? I mean, the biggest, when you read Mahabharata, is, the Draupadi Vastraharan. And these guys are watching. And you feel like, how can they just sit there and watch? But in the end, it all turned out, and it was proven that when you look at it from the concept of their entire life, the holistic life, they followed dharma. There was a reason why they did what they did, and that guiding pole star was the pole star of dharma. And it worked out for everyone, including Draupadi. It worked out. We will now come to verse 21.
Arjuna uvacha senayorubhayormadhye natam stapya mechyuta.
So Arjuna says, in the midst of the two armies, place my chariot. Achyuta, O Achyuta. Achyuta means the infallible. Chyuta is fall, Achyuta is one who cannot fall. He addresses Krishna as Achyuta and gives him a command. You are my charioteer, right? So I'm going to command you. Like we tell the driver, drive to Anjanagiri. So drive to the middle of the battlefield. I want to inspect the forces. Here, Arjuna's mindset is that of a warrior. That's the mind that he has. And he wants to review the forces. Krishna, Bhagavan, is still his charioteer. He is not a guru. He is not a god. Not yet. And he thus orders his charioteer to take the chariot to the center of the battlefield. My chariot. Not the chariot. Not your chariot. Not the chariot that Bhagavan Indra has given me. Take my chariot to the middle of the battlefield. One more point in this is that this power to be able to command Krishna comes from the love that they share. There's a tremendous love between the two of them. In love, there are no niceties. Only in courtship, there is nicety. So Arjuna actually commands. And then we continue with verse 24, 25 also.
Sanjaya uvacha eva mukto hrishikeshaha gurakeshena bharata senayorubhayor madhye stapajitva ratottamam Bhishmadrona pramukataha sarvesham chamahikshitam uvacha partha pasyetan samavetan kuruniti.
So this is Sanjaya speaking. So Sanjaya says that thus addressed, thus commanded by who? By Gudakesa. Gudakesa is the name for Arjuna. And he says, O Bharata. He is talking to Dhritarashtra. He addresses Dhritarashtra as O Bharata. And Hrishikesa, who is Bhagavan Sri Krishna, he took the chariot and stationed it in the middle of the battlefield between the two armies. And then he says, in front of, right in front of, Pramutakaha, right in front of Bhishma, Drona, and all the rulers of the earth, the kings. And Sanjaya is saying, this is not Bhagwan Vacha. Sanjaya is telling Dhritarashtra, Krishna says, O Partha, behold, now see. Please see the Kurus all assembled together. So we saw that Sanjaya is addressing Dhritarashtra as Bharata. This indicates that he belongs to the lineage of King Bharata. The name of our country, that is Bharat, meaning the land which was ruled by King Bharat. Our country is named after. We name our house after our parents. Similarly, our country is named after the parent king, King Bharata. That's how Bharat comes. Hindustan came from the Persians, referring to the Mughal Empire. India came from the Greek, who pronounced river Sindhu as, they couldn't pronounce Sindhu. They pronounced it as Indus. And from Indus, the land of Indus is India. But our original country name is Bharata from King Bharat. Gudakesha is, Gudaka means slumber, laziness, tamas. Esha means one who has conquered. Gudakesha is one who has conquered slumber, who has conquered laziness. This is Arjuna. Arjuna is one who has conquered tamas. And it's very, very critical here because he's going to enter into tamas. Tamas leads to delusion. And that is why this verse is very meaningful, because up until this point in time, Arjuna is completely free of delusion. The reference to Bhagwan, Hrishikesha, again, Esha is the Lord, and Hrishikesha is one who watches, who controls, who governs. We have seen some of this in chapter 4-5, and we will see it later also. One who is governing, controlling, and watching everything. And the charioteer, Sri Krishna, he takes the vehicle, which is the Ratha, right in front of Bhishma and Drona, Pramutaka, so that there is eye contact. And he says, now see Arjuna, see what you wanted to see, these Kurus who are assembled to fight. And what does Arjuna see? The first chapter is a masterpiece in understanding of the human mind. Arjuna went there to see who is this who dares to fight with me. And once he went there, what did he see? Did he see who is this who dares to fight with me? And the first chapter also shows how Shoka or sorrow and Moha or delusion are enemies of Dharma, that Paradharma. If you don't do Dharma, then it is Swadharma Nasha. Swadharma is one doing one's duty. Swadharma Nasha is not dereliction of duty. How Shoka and Moha lead to dereliction of duty. That also is beautifully shown by Bhagavad Gita. And this is also another very crucial phrase, Senayor Ubayor Madhye. That is the spot where the entire Bhagavad Gita, which after centuries we are reading, was spoken by Bhagavan. That Senayor Ubayor Madhye. We'll go to verse 26.
Tatra pashyate tan partaha pitrnata pitamahan acharyan matulan bratran putran pautran sakins tata. So from this vantage point, so Krishna took the chariot to a vantage point, not only to a vantage point, Pramutaka, where he could see Bhishma, Drona and others. What did Arjuna see? Did Arjuna see the enemy lines he wanted to inspect? Did he see the fierce, vicious elements of that ferocious river, the Rananadi, which we recited in Gita Dhyanam? That ferocious elements of war? Is that what he saw? Arjuna saw stationed there fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends. That is what he saw. Perception and perspective must go through the filter of dharma. They can't go through the filter of aham and mama. They have to go through the filter of dharma. A judge must see from the eyes of the law of the land. In the Katgara, in the that witness box is standing his own son. He can't see my son. He has to see it from the eye of the law of the land. A surgeon must see from the eye of the Hippocratic oath. A soldier must see from the eyes of his nation. That is the filter of dharma that one must employ. If you don't employ that, you're going to be in trouble. Arjuna, did he employ that? He went there with the intention of employing that. But once he goes there, he got distracted. Do we remember the input-output model that we just went through? Perception, sense organs, objective mind, intellect, subjective mind, organs of action. So the disconnect between the objective and subjective minds, that happens in the intellect. Instead of seeing warriors, instead of seeing people who are going to shoot at you, the intellect says, hey, my father, my grandfather, my guru, my cousin, my friend. And in whose mind did this disconnect happen? It happened in the mind of one of the foremost warriors of those times, Arjuna. And here, Kunti Putra is what is used. Because Kunti Putra, because he is Kunti Putra, he is his cousin. If he was Gudakesha, he wouldn't have seen his cousin. The lens that he wore in his intellect, like we wear a lens in front of our eyes, the lens that covered his intellect was the lens of Kunti Putra. It was not the lens of Gudakesha. That lens was of aham and mama, I and mine. As if this were a banquet, a family gathering, not a battlefield. Now we go to verse 27, 28.
Pashpuran suhridaschaiva senayodubhayorapi tan samikshya sa kaunteya sarvan bandhunavastitan kripaya paraya vishtaha vishidanidamabravit Arjuna uvacha drishtve swajanam Krishna Yuyutsum samupastitam.
Let's do 29-30 also.
Sidanti mama gatrani mukam cha parishusyati vepatuscha sharire me romaharshascha jayati gandivam shamsate hastat tyakchaiva paridahyati Nasha shaknomyavastatum pramativa cha me manaha.
27 I already, before she recited, I completed it. Verse 27 we see, what did Arjuna see? Did he see warriors? No, he saw kinsmen. That's what he saw. Then it says, Abhishtaha, when he thus saw what he saw through that filter, something took possession of his mind. Avishtaha means take possession. And what took possession of his mind? Kripaya. Kripaya is pity or compassion. And paraya. Paraya is something which is deep and supreme. Another meaning of paraya is something which is out of place, something that does not belong, something that does not fit in, something that should not be there. That sense of compassion at this stage, after the war bugles have been sounded, does it fit in? Given the background of what has happened in the Mahabharata, we will come to some of that a little later also. Over the last so many years, misplaced sense of compassion took possession. He just didn't feel it. It took possession of him. And in these three verses, which is 28, 29, 30, we find the presentation of various symptoms of sorrow, of shoka. Sorrow has crept into Arjuna because he is seeing that I have to fight my grandfather, I have to fight my guru, I have to fight my cousin, I have to fight my friend. And not only has it's taken possession, it's reached to speak. And seeing his own people in this manner, and they are eager to fight, by the way. He's the only one who's going through all of this. The rest of the Pandavas are also eager to fight. Sri Krishna is eager to fight. Everyone else is eager to fight. But here, the biggest warrior, the fulcrum of that Pandava army, what does he do? He lists out 8 symptoms of expressions of his shoka. The first thing he says is, Mama gatrani sidanti. My limbs fail me. I am feeling very weak. Mukham parishushyati. My mouth is drying up. My throat is parched. Sharire me vepatuscha. My body is trembling. There are shivers up my spine. Roma harsha jayate. My hair is standing on its end. It's a hair-raising experience. Gandivam samsrate hastat. The bow is slipping out of my hand. Arjuna's bow's name is Gandiva. It's slipping out of my hand. Tvak paridahyate. My skin is burning and I am sweaty. Na shaknomya avasthatum. I am not able to stand. Me manaha brahma tiva. My head is spinning. Initially my mind was spinning and now my head is spinning. So 6 descriptions of Shoka. In the 13th year of the exile of the Pandavas, they had to live in incognito. If they had been found out, they would have to go back to 13 more years. That is the deal that they had after losing the last dice game. 13 more years of exile. So the 13th year they spent in disguise as servants to King Virata. Arjuna disguised as a eunuch, Brihanala, that was the name of the eunuch. And in King Virata's court, there was this brother-in-law of his who is Kichika. Kichika was the commander-in-chief of the army. He was smitten by Draupadi and he tried to seduce her. And Bhima, enraged, the same Bhima who kept quiet when Dushasana was disturbing her, he killed Kichika. Now when the news of Kichika's death spread, Duryodhana knew Kichika was extremely strong. There were only a few people who can, bring his end. He said, this cannot be anybody else. I am one of them, I am here. Karna is the other one who can kill Kichika. And I know where Karna is. The only other person who can kill Kichika is Bhima. This is his doing. Now I'm going to find them out. 13th year is not yet over. I'm going to expose them. And he takes his army and launches a battle, a war in King Virata's. And he does it very intelligently, by the way, guided by Dronacharya. The same Dronacharya who he insults at the beginning of the war. So Dronacharya guides him and tells him, take one flank that way and draw out everyone else. And take another flank to get hold of the kingdom. So the first flank was defended by 4 Pandavas. The 5th flank was defended only by Arjuna, who was disguised as the eunuch. And this attack was launched. And Prince Uttara, who was the prince of the kingdom, he and Arjuna, as Brihanala, they defended this flank. And single-handedly, Uttara was his charioteer. And with him as the charioteer, he defeated this flank. Who all were there? Bhishma, Drona, Kripacharya, Duryodhana, Karna. All of them were there. And Arjuna single-handedly defeated them. And he also took a robe. All of them fainted. And he took a piece of robe from them as a souvenir. That Arjuna, today, now, the same Arjuna, middle of Kurukshetra. And now he's saying, I have these symptoms of Shoka, which are sorrow and which are making me sorrowful. So the context of why he was in Kurukshetra and where he is going now. We will go to verse 36.
Nihatya dhatra rashtranaha ka priti sya janardhana papameva shrayedasman hadvetanatayinaha.
Atatayinaha, feelings. So Arjuna is telling Krishna, I am having all of this, and why killing these sons of Dhritarashtra? What is the pleasure that we are going to get, O Janardana? Sin alone, even though they are villains. Those who have committed 6 kinds of crimes are villains. Those 6 are, the first one is setting another person on fire. Duryodhana put fire to the Lax palace, the palace of wax, in which the Pandavas were hiding. Giving poison to another. Duryodhana gave poison to Bhima. Brandishing weapons, threatening, like Gundas do. He did that when Sri Krishna, Bhagwan went to Hastinapura to final messenger of peace. He went as an emissary. But Duryodhana brandished his weapons and ordered for capture of Krishna. Taking away another's wealth. Not only did Duryodhana snatch away Pandava's wealth, but he had the habit of snatching away citizens' wealth too. Taking away others' land. Indraprastha, he just took it away by deceit. Taking away others' wife. Draupadi Vastraharan. Duryodhana has done all of these, not one, even if you do one, you are a villain. All of these Duryodhana has done, and he has earned the title of Atatayinaha, a person who deserves to be killed. But Arjuna says it will not lead to any good, even to kill villains. We'll go to 37.
तस्मानार्हा वयं हन्तुं धार्तराष्ट्रान् स्वबान्धवान् स्वजनं हि कथं हत्वा सुखिनः स्याम माधव.
So Arjuna has in chapter 1, Arjuna has, by the way, very logical mind. A deluded mind is also very logical. A person who is under delusion does not lose out on logic. The first argument of Arjuna was Nimittani. We have not read that verse, but it's there. He talks about omens and he talks about Nashreyo. There is no good of doing all of this. The second argument is Swajanam, our own people. What is the use of killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? Our people, our relatives. How can we be happy by killing someone who is mine? It doesn't make sense. He tries to make a personal appeal to Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna, by the way, has been silent. He's not uttered a word till now. Even his say of, when Sri Krishna is saying, see the forces, Sanjaya has recited that Bhagavan says, please see. So he says, Madhava is the word he uses. Madhava means husband of Lakshmi. Mayaha Davaha, husband of Lakshmi. You also family man. These are our people. Why should we? We should empathize with them. So the third wave of delusion of Arjuna, in the subsequent verses, he, in addition to these two, which is number one, bad omens, no good, no Shreya, and Swajanam, our own. In addition to that, he now talks about, he says, if we stage a war, there will be destruction of families. Destruction of families will lead to good practices being perished. Good practices perishment will lead to impiety or adharma, and adharma will prevail in the entire land. That will then create a condition where women's respect deteriorates. It's already happened under his own eyes, his own wife. But he says, now if I fight this war, it will lead to a state of condition of women getting deteriorated in our society. That will lead to contamination of society. That leads to traditions being destroyed. And then finally, everyone will go to hell. And all those who are in heaven will fall from grace. All these arguments, logically, one after the other, Arjuna gives to Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna remains silent. And then Sanjaya says, 47.
Sanjaya uvacha eva muktva Arjuna sankhye ratopasta upavishat visrijya sasharam shapam shoka samvikna manasaha.
And after giving all these arguments, then Sanjaya now says, having spoken like this in the midst of the warriors, in the middle of the battlefield, Arjuna sat down in the seat of his chariot, casting away his weapons, bows and arrows, with a mind that is completely distressed. The greatest warrior of his time, incomparable in valor, his mind inflicted, completely engulfed in sorrow. From greatest intelligence to utter incompetence, there is one bridge, and that bridge is sorrow. And that sorrow comes from aham mama. And that sorrow leads to moha. Comes from aham mama, that encapsulation in my body, mind, intellect. That leads to aham mama, my relatives. That leads to sorrow. That leads to moha, delusion. That leads to swadharmanasha, and there is where Arjuna is. Greatest intelligence, greatest warrior to utter incompetence through sorrow. And all this while Sri Krishna is silent, like a good psychiatrist listening to his patient, allowing Arjuna to express completely, fully, say everything, get out of your chest. And with that we come to the end of chapter 1 of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is termed as Arjuna Vishada Yoga. The yoga of Arjuna's sorrow and delusion, Vishada, Shoka and Moha. And now the beauty will start from the next chapter. Thank you, Hari Om. We do invocation.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityodma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you, Hari Om. I'll first read what Nipun had sent something on chat. So Nipun is saying one question on the question of searching at the wrong place. Here is a good example I heard. Searching and seeking, he's talking about. A policeman sees a drunk man searching for something under a street light and asks what the drunk has lost. He says he has lost his keys. And they both look under the street light together. After a few minutes, the policeman asks if he is sure he lost them there. And the drunk replies no, and that he lost them in the park. The policeman asks, why is he searching here? And the drunk replies, this is where the light is. Nice one.
So I heard this in the context of like we search for happiness outside because it's easier,
Yes.
right? It may not, that happiness may not be there, but we still research it there. So
True. Yeah. Any thoughts, comments? So today I have, in addition to my mother and my sister Jyoti, who are always here, I have two more people. One of them who you don't see on the this. So there's Aditi, and that's my niece Amrita.
So this is on
Correct.
dharma and adharma. In Mahabharata, we say that Pandavas did commit some adharmic deeds, but ultimately what they achieved was dharma, right? Yudhishthira, who was called the Dharma king, he actually put his wife at stake. It certainly is not dharma. So are we saying that the ultimate goal is important and now not how you attain it? Is it fair even if you perform adharmic deeds, but ultimately you attain dharma?
Sure. So, so the question is that Yudhishthira, for example, Pandavas performed adharmic deeds, and Yudhishthira's adharmic deed was, to put his own wife, and before that his brother's kingdom, all of that at stake. Now, dharma, like I said, is what is it that makes the person who he is, the entity what that entity is. In this case, Yudhishthira's dharma, the dharma that he followed was that of the king, was that of the person who is protecting the subjects. It's like the Rama example, that question that was asked earlier. I think you only asked, if I'm not wrong, that how did Rama, tell Sita to go away? The Rama was following the dharma of the king, which is the identity of that person. The husband is not the identity of the person. The identity of the person is that the role that he was playing for not one person. The husband is of one person. The king is for all the subjects of the land. So the pole star, that dharma pole star, is what Yudhishthira followed.
I have another one. So we say Arjuna's dharma as a warrior was to fight, right? Now, what I feel is that was one of his dharmas. He also had a dharma as a son, as a grandson, as a brother, as a student, which took over at that point in time in the battlefield. So, and also, I mean, with respect to our daily life, how do we decide what is our supreme dharma? We have a lot of dharmas, right? I would have as a mother, as a coach, so how do we decide which is supreme?
So see, there is a difference between dharma and duty. Swadharma is duty. Dharma is that one element that creates our identity. So following dharma will enable us to do our duty well. Following that pole star will enable us to do our duty well. So following dharma will enable, each one of us has to find out what our dharma is. That's why when we go through Bhagavad Gita, the main goal, in fact, not one of our goals, the main goal should be to find our dharma, mama dharma. And if we do that, the duty of a mother, the duty of a coach, the duty of anybody else, a human being, a traffic, when you're going in the traffic, how you're behaving, there is an accident, what happens, how do you respond? All of that will fall into place if you follow that dharma. At that spot, if there is seemingly that you have not done your duty properly, like Yudhishthira did not do his duty of a husband properly, seemingly. But because he followed the principle of dharma, in the end, all of that fell in place. So that is why it is that pole star. Even though it may seem wrong, even though you may laugh at, there are lots of instances where Pandavas can be laughed at. And at that time, they were laughed at. But in the end, it all came together. And that is the example, that is what Bhagwan gives. And Mahabharata is such a beautiful example for us to follow. Ramayana is such a beautiful example for us to follow. That when you see the entire context of the lives of Sri Rama, the Pandavas, Sri Krishna, all of that. In instances, it will appear that they are doing wrong. They are not following dharma. They are not doing good. They are not doing duty. But when you see it in the entire context, as long as they have stuck, it may appear differently to other people. But as long as they have stuck, over time proves that they were right. In fact, the Dharma Purusha, Yudhishthira is known to be Dharma Purusha. That is the reason. Because every time everybody else thought that, oh my God, what is kind of a nonsensical action is he taking? It got proven later that, it was good action because he stuck to that principle. When you, even in normal life, when we stick to principle, some people find us that this guy is unreasonable, this person is not behaving well, not good, getting angry for no cause, whatever it may be. But if it is principle oriented, then you are sticking to dharma. Then over a period of time, it gets shown that, yes, it was okay.
Thank you.
Any other thought?
One question, Srini.
Yes.
Both Kauravas and Pandavas were taught by the same teacher, right? Then how come their dharma, the choice of dharma become different?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Both of them had the same teacher.
Yeah.
So how come the choice of dharma became? See,
Yeah.
the teacher's role is to teach, to impart. It is the student's role to absorb. So what Kauravas absorbed, what Duryodhana absorbed. Actually, Duryodhana, by the way, Duryodhana is also a very powerful person, if you see some of the Indian mythological stories, the quote-unquote villain, the bad character, Duryodhana, Ravana, Hiranyakashipu, very, very powerful people, okay, extremely steadfast in whatever they are pursuing. So they also have very good qualities. Ultimately, what they stood for, their dharmic star pole, everything was wrong. But by nature, they are very powerful. So Duryodhana had the entire, everybody following him. So what he imported, what he learned was different from what the Pandavas learned. Dronacharya taught the same thing to all of them. What you seek, what you understand, the different students understand differently based on their perspectives. And Duryodhana's perspective was very, very clear. My father is the elder brother. So what if he's blind? I am the legal heir to the throne. And he saw Pandavas as a threat throughout his life, that they will take away what rightfully belongs to him. And under that feeling, all of his strengths got misguided towards the wrong direction. So it is these stories are beautifully made to depict normal situations that happen to us also.
Right.
Otherwise, a very powerful person.
Right. Why I'm asking this question is, for example, unlike today, there were, very, very limited societal influences, right? I mean, they were both Duryodhana and Yudhishthira. They were both sons of brothers, same genealogy, everything, right? But the influence of society or influence of, other factors might have, contributed to the different characters. So is it like, one is, you can learn, you can seek, but there is something intrinsic that is your DNA, right? Within you, that is also contributing to your character.
Everything contributes. Even that's why we talked about vasanas, the inherent tendencies that come up because of the input process output model. So one is the genetic code, the DNA that you're talking about. The other is the paradigm that comes from BMI, and those are the vasanas. Some of the vasanas that come from previous janma karma also, as per our scriptures. All of that contributes, but the fundamental lesson, and that is why these stories have so many beautiful examples, because they depict, in spite of so many yugas going away, passing on, so many years, centuries, after so many centuries, it is still relevant. These are fundamentals of human nature, society, and elements of nature, the prakriti and the samsara. These are all fundamentals. These are all the basic traits. That is why everything is still valid. That is why we can still relate to a Duryodhana and to an Arjuna. All of that we can relate to. So the point is this: given all of that, given your genetic code, given your DNA, given your vasanas, given the environmental aspects, given everything, despite all of that, in the long run, in the story of your life, what is the direction that you have followed? Have you chosen the right pole star? Have you identified the true north? And have you successfully traversed and navigated that life? All this is meant to teach us to do it in the right way. And if you understand it well, like the Pandavas, not like Duryodhana, then we will definitely identify the true north, and we'll follow the true north also. So given all of that, how do we lead our life is the question.
Right. Thank you, Srini.
So Upasana texted, it is parenting and the environment that one is brought up in which builds the personality of a person. Duryodhana's personality has a strong influence of Shakuni. I mean, if you read Mahabharata, it's not like Duryodhana spent all his time with Shakuni. Duryodhana, like I said, is also a very, very strong personality. Shakuni also was very influenced by Duryodhana.
He was being brainwashed by Shakuni all the time. I mean, he was totally brainwashed. He won't hear anybody else. Even Bhishma, he didn't hear any of those people, his gurus, none of them.
So the point is this, what I just said, when
Yes.
Upama raised that point. In spite, given all this, given your genetic code to given your brainwashing, are you able to identify true north? Well, everyone told Yudhishthira that you should not, participate in the game of, but he did, no? Everyone, he did not allow himself to be brainwashed.
Arjuna was on the verge of despondency. He was on the verge of, end of chapter 1, Arjuna is broken down completely. He's a wreck. He's a psychological wreck. But he emerges, comes back, strong and powerful, and wins the war. He didn't allow himself to be brainwashed. Even at a state of being psychological wreck, he didn't allow himself to be brainwashed. So you allow yourself to be brainwashed because you have the inherent tendency. If you don't have the inherent tendency, you will not allow that brainwash. You will allow a different kind of brainwash. So even if you have to get brainwashed by Sri Krishna, no?
So dharma is all about.
Which is what Arjuna allowed. He allowed himself to be brainwashed by Sri Krishna.
Dharma is all about doing the right thing, no? That's why. So let the external influences not matter to you, and you do the right thing, whatever may happen.
First of all, identify the right thing, because if you think the Duryodhana did the right thing as per him, except it turned out to be the wrong identity, the wrong pole star. As per him, till the end, till he died, he didn't leave it. So he thought he was going north, but he was not. And he continued with conviction, belief that he thought where he was going is the right direction. So first is to identify the right direction, then follow it. Any other thought? Okay, it's also 5:45. So if no other thought, then we will meet next Saturday. We'll do chapter 2. I'm going to try and complete chapter 2 because after that we have 3, 4, 5 also. So as much as possible, I'll try and cover next Saturday. Thank you. Hari Om.